The HOA president stood in my driveway with two sheriff's deputies, screaming that I was squatting in her son's inheritance, 3 weeks after I legally purchased the property for $3. This was the 137-year-old mansion my dying friend Gerald begged me to save from state seizure after COVID-19 killed his entire family in 1 month. His wife, his daughter, his parents. All gone while he fought the virus alone in that crumbling Victorian estate. What this Karen didn't know was that the quiet guy in paint-stained jeans she was threatening. I was Trevor Bancroft, CEO of Rocky Mountain Heritage Insurance, the company that's held the land grant on her entire neighborhood since 1888. And I had documentation proving her inheritance claim was built on forged documents and bribery. If you've ever wondered how far a power-hungry HOA president will go to steal property that isn't theirs, this story will leave you speechless. Have you ever made a legal purchase only to have someone show up with cops claiming you're the criminal? Has an HOA president ever tried to intimidate you off your own property? Have you watched someone abuse their tiny bit of authority like they own the world? This Karen thought she could weaponize the police and her HOA position to steal an $8.7 million estate. Until she discovered one critical mistake. Stick around to see how I turned her fraud attempt into federal charges and dismantled her entire property theft operation. If you've battled HOA corruption, smash that like button. You're about to love watching this Karen get exactly what she deserves. Now let me take you back to May 2020, when COVID-19 was devastating Colorado, and my friend Gerald made a choice that would expose corruption 25 years in the making. Gerald Whitmore called me at 2 a.m. from his hospital bed, his voice barely a whisper through the oxygen mask. "Trevor, I'm dying, and I need you to save my family's home." April 2020 had been hell for Gerald. COVID-19 took his wife Janet on April 8th. His daughter Emily died 7 days later. His parents went within 24 hours of each other, April 22nd and 23rd. 4 funerals Gerald couldn't attend because he was fighting the virus himself, isolated in that massive Victorian mansion, waiting to see if he'd be the 5th death. He survived the virus, but his heart didn't survive burying his entire family. The Whitmore estate rose from 12 acres of overgrown gardens like a ghost from Colorado's silver boom era. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, turrets and gables weathered by 137 winters, stained glass windows dim behind boards nailed up decades ago, worth $8.7 million according to 2020 appraisals, crumbling, alone, waiting to die with its last owner. Gerald's great-great-grandfather Augustus built that mansion in 1888 with silver mining money. 5 generations of Whitmores had lived there. Gerald was the last, and Colorado's unclaimed property laws were about to take it. If I die without a clear heir, the state seizes everything, Gerald explained when I visited him in early May. His hands shook, not from the virus, from grief. They'll auction it off. Some developer will buy it for pennies, bulldoze it, and build condos. Everything Augustus built, everything my family was, gone. I'd known Gerald for 15 years. My insurance company had helped him navigate property taxes, liability policies, maintenance issues as the old house deteriorated and his money ran out. He'd become more than a client. He was a friend. "What do you need?" I asked. "Buy it from me." His eyes met mine. Desperate, determined. $3. 1 for each century she stood. That's all I ask. Just don't let the state auction her off to some developer who'll bulldoze history for condos. His voice cracked. "Promise me, Trev." I took the pen. "I promise." We signed the papers on May 18th, 2020. Full legal sale. Recorded with Boulder County. Title transferred. $3. The symbolic price of preserving history. Gerald died 6 days later. His last words were asking if I'd started the restoration yet. I had. Scraping lead paint from the East Tower, planning electrical upgrades, researching historical preservation grants. For 3 peaceful weeks, I worked alone in that mansion, honoring my promise. Then on June 9th, I heard tires screeching on gravel. I looked out to see a silver Lexus blocking my truck, 2 police cruisers behind it, and a woman in a designer pantsuit storming toward my door with fury in her eyes. Have you ever made a promise to someone dying that changed your entire life? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. She didn't knock. She pounded on the door like she was trying to break it down. "Open up! You're trespassing on my property." The words hit before I even reached the handle. I opened the door to chaos. Patricia Drummond stood on my porch like a general surveying conquered territory. Pressed navy pantsuit without a wrinkle, pearl earrings catching morning sun, HOA president badge pinned prominently on her lapel like a medal of authority. Behind her, 2 Boulder County deputies shifted uncomfortably. They looked uncertain, like they weren't sure why they'd been summoned for what looked like a property dispute. She held a leather portfolio stuffed with papers. Her manicured nails tapped against it with aggressive impatience. "I am Patricia Drummond, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association." Her voice carried across the yard, loud enough for neighbors to hear. That was the point. "And I'm here to inform you that you are illegally occupying property that belongs to my son." I stood there in paint-stained jeans, rollers still in my hand, silent. Gerald Whitmore had no legal right to sell this estate. She stepped closer, invading my space, aggressive, practiced. "The property reverts to the Drummond family upon his death. I have documentation proving ownership." She waved the portfolio like a weapon. "You have exactly 24 hours to vacate before I file criminal charges for fraud and trespassing." One deputy cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this sounds like a civil property dispute." "It's criminal!" Patricia snapped. "This man is squatting on stolen property. I want it documented." She turned back to me, eyes cold, voice dripping with condescension. "Look at you. Paint on your clothes, dirt under your nails. You actually thought you could buy an $8.7 million estate for $3. She laughed. Gerald was dying, confused. That sale was invalid. "And you're about to learn what happens when you try to con the wrong family." The deputies looked uncomfortable. One asked to see her documentation. The other asked if I had proof of purchase. Before I could answer, I heard another car pull up. A black Mercedes with tinted windows, license plate reading Drummond ESQ. Patricia smiled, triumphant. "That's my son. He's an attorney, specializes in estate recovery." She looked at me like I was already defeated. "This is going to be very simple. You leave voluntarily, or we make you leave legally. Your choice." I watched this woman I'd never met claim ownership of property I'd legally purchased from a dying friend. The deputies looked uncertain. Patricia looked triumphant. And that's when Bradley Drummond stepped out of his Mercedes carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of smile that told me this wasn't his first property ambush. This was a routine he'd perfected. This wasn't just harassment. This was a coordinated attack. Have you ever had someone show up at your home with police, trying to intimidate you off your own property? What did you do? Drop your story below. Bradley Drummond was everything you'd expect from someone who specialized in estate recovery. Custom-tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Italian leather shoes that had never seen actual work. And the kind of practiced expression that said he delivered devastating legal news to vulnerable people so many times it bored him. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, which made his predatory confidence even more disturbing. "Mr. Bancroft, is it?" He didn't offer his hand. "I'm Bradley Drummond, attorney at law, representing the Drummond family estate." He pulled papers from his briefcase. Theatrical, precise. "I understand you believe you purchased this property, but I'm afraid you've been the victim of an invalid transaction." His tone was condescending, like explaining to a child why they couldn't keep the puppy they found. Gerald Whitmore didn't have clear title to sell. My client, my mother, holds reversionary rights established in 1995 when her ex-husband's claim was improperly transferred. He handed me a document. "This emergency eviction notice requires you to vacate within 48 hours pending judicial review. Court hearing is scheduled for Monday." He checked his watch. "That gives you exactly 2 days to remove your belongings and surrender the keys." Behind him, a news van pulled up. Camera crew, reporter, setting up on the public street. Patricia's smile widened. She'd called them. The reporter approached. "Mrs. Drummond, can you tell us what's happening here?" Patricia dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "Performance ready." "This is a very difficult situation. My family's estate, property that's been in our family since 1995, was improperly sold while we were grieving. We're simply trying to reclaim what's rightfully ours." The reporter turned to Bradley. "And you're representing the family?" "That's correct. This is an unfortunately common situation. Vulnerable sellers, unclear title, opportunistic buyers. We specialize in estate recovery, helping families reclaim property that was improperly transferred." The camera turned to me. "Mr. Bancroft, do you have a comment?" I stayed silent, not out of fear, out of strategy. Patricia took that as weakness. "You see how he won't even defend himself?" She spoke to the camera. "Because he knows what he did was wrong." Bradley stepped closer, lowered his voice, just for me. "Here's how this works. You can fight us in court, spend thousands on legal fees you'll never recover, drag this out for months while we file injunctions, liens, and financial claims against you personally, or..." He smiled. "You can walk away now. Save yourself the embarrassment and expense. We're not unreasonable people. We understand mistakes happen." One deputy was taking notes. The other kept glancing at me, waiting for a response. The reporter asked her question for the camera. "Mrs. Drummond, how does it feel to finally reclaim your family's stolen property?" Patricia dabbed fake tears again. "It's bittersweet. We never wanted conflict. But sometimes you have to stand up for what's right." Bradley stood beside her, confident, camera ready. The deputies were documenting everything, and I realized something that made my hands steady. These people had done this before. This was a system. This was practiced, coordinated, weaponized, and I'd just become their latest target. Time to make one phone call. If a lawyer showed up at your door with cameras and cops, would you say nothing until you got your own attorney? Or would you defend yourself on the spot? Tell me what you'd do. But before we continue, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will blow your mind. This HOA president has no idea who she just messed with. I pulled out my phone. Patricia actually laughed. "Calling your lawyer?" Her voice dripped with mockery. "Good luck finding anyone willing to take a case this hopeless." She looked at Bradley, shared a knowing smile. They'd seen this before. Desperate homeowners making last-minute calls to legal aid attorneys who take one look at the case and decline. "Honey, you're about to have a criminal record. Patricia added. I ignored her. I stood on the porch of that 137-year-old mansion, Augustus Whitmore's legacy, Gerald's dying wish, my legal property, and watched Patricia Drummond perform for cameras like she'd already won. Bradley checked his Rolex, practiced impatience. The deputies exchanged glances that said they wanted to be anywhere else. The news camera kept rolling, and I made the call that would end her operation. Rachel, it's Trevor. I kept my voice quiet, calm. I need the legal team at the Whitmore estate. Full documentation package, original 1888 land grant, every title transfer since then, and pull everything we have on Maple Ridge HOA property transactions for the last decade. Pause. Patricia rolled her eyes at Bradley. Yes, all of it. We have a situation. A situation? Patricia mocked. Honey, you're about to have a... Bradley, how many cases has your firm handled in Maple Ridge over the last 5 years? I asked. Direct. Loud enough for the camera to catch. He blinked, caught off guard. I'm sorry? Estate recovery cases. How many? I don't see how that's relevant. 14, I said. 14 families, all in this neighborhood, all within 24 months of a family member's death, all pressured into selling below market value or surrendering property rights. Bradley's face went carefully blank. Patricia's eyes narrowed. I have no idea what you're talking about, Bradley said. You will. One deputy finally spoke up, his voice careful, official. Mr. Bancroft, do you have documentation showing you purchased this property? I met his eyes. I have a fully executed sale agreement, recorded deed, title insurance, and the blessing of the property's legal owner before his death 3 weeks ago. My attorney will provide copies when she arrives. She? Patricia interrupted. Her confidence cracked. Just slightly. You think some local legal aid lawyer is going to... 3 black SUVs turned into the driveway. She stopped mid-sentence. The vehicles were black, professional, the kind insurance companies and corporate legal teams use. 4 people stepped out. Suits, briefcases, file boxes. Patricia's face went from smug victory to confused alarm in 5 seconds flat. Bradley's practiced composure faltered. One deputy's hand moved toward his radio. Instinct. Something had changed. The news camera swung to capture the new arrivals. And Rachel Chen, my senior legal counsel, 20 years in property law, the attorney who'd handled more title disputes than Patricia had filed HOA violations, stepped forward with 3 associates behind her. They moved like a deployment, not a response. This wasn't defensive. This was offensive. When someone tries to bully you with fake authority, do you fight back immediately or stay quiet and let them underestimate you? What's your strategy? 4 attorneys stepped out of those SUVs carrying file boxes. Patricia's face went from smug victory to confused alarm in 5 seconds flat. Rachel Chen moved with the precision of someone who'd spent 2 decades in property law depositions and courtroom battles. She placed 3 file boxes on the hood of her SUV, extracted documents with practiced efficiency, handed copies to both deputies without acknowledging Patricia's existence. Behind her, 3 associates set up a mobile office on my driveway. Laptop, portable printer, document scanner. This wasn't a response to harassment. This was a deployment. Gentlemen, Rachel addressed the deputies with courtroom authority. I'm Rachel Chen, Senior Counsel for Rocky Mountain Heritage Insurance. My client, Mr. Bancroft, legally purchased this property on May 18, 2020, from Gerald Whitmore, who held clear title through continuous family ownership since 1888. She handed over a binder. Thick, professional, tabbed. Here's the recorded deed, the fully executed purchase agreement, and title insurance confirmation. She flipped to another tab. Here's Gerald Whitmore's death certificate, proving he survived long enough to complete the transaction. Here's the medical certification from his attending physician confirming mental competency at time of sale. Here's his attorney's affidavit witnessing and approving the transaction. One deputy took the binder, started reading. Patricia stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Gerald didn't have the right to. Rachel finally looked at her. Ice cold. Mrs. Drummond's claim of reversionary rights is not only legally invalid, it's based on a property transfer that never existed. She pulled another document, handed it to the second deputy. This is the 1995 divorce settlement between Patricia Drummond and Richard Drummond, Gerald Whitmore's late cousin. Section 7, paragraph 3. Clearly states that Richard Drummond sold his minority stake in certain Whitmore family properties to Gerald's father, Thomas Whitmore, for $50,000. Full consideration, legally binding, recorded with Boulder County. She looked at Patricia. You weren't family, Mrs. Drummond. You were the ex-wife of a cousin who sold his property rights 25 years ago. You have no claim. You never did. Bradley's face had gone from arrogant confidence to pale realization. He stepped aside with Patricia. Whispered urgently. She kept shaking her head, pointing at the house, her voice rising. The news camera caught every second. One deputy looked up from the binder. Ma'am, these documents appear to be in order. The deed is recorded. The sale is legal. This is a civil matter at best, and frankly, I'm not sure you have standing to. Of course I have standing. Patricia's voice went shrill. Gerald owed us the courtesy of offering the property to family first. We would have offered to the family. Rachel's smile was ice. Mrs. Drummond, you weren't family. You were the ex-wife of Gerald's cousin, a man who sold his property rights 25 years ago. She paused. Let that sink in. But since you mentioned family obligations. Rachel pulled another file from the box. Bradley's eyes went wide. He recognized something. A moment of panic before he controlled his expression. Let's talk about the other properties your son has recovered through similar fraudulent inheritance claims. The file hit the SUV hood with a heavy thud. Bradley's composure completely shattered. Patricia opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The deputies stopped taking notes, started paying real attention, and the news camera zoomed in on the file. Rachel opened it. April 2015. Helen Martinez, age 79, died of cancer. 2 weeks later, your mother filed HOA violations against her property. 3 weeks after that, Bradley here filed inheritance claims on behalf of a long-lost nephew who turned out to be his paralegal. She pulled out documents, photos, property records. The family sold under pressure for $340,000. Bradley's development client bought it for $350,000 and flipped it 6 months later for $890,000. She looked up, her voice sharp, cutting. Shall I continue? I have 13 more. Rachel opened that file, and I watched Bradley Drummond realize his entire career was about to become public record. The files Rachel spread across the SUV hood told a story of calculated predation. 14 properties, 14 recent deaths, 14 families targeted in their grief. Each file contained property records, forged documents, transfer histories, and one common name, Bradley Drummond, attorney for the rightful heirs. Patricia's name appeared too. HOA violation notices filed against each property within weeks of the owner's death, softening targets for Bradley's legal assault. April 2015. Rachel read from the first file, her voice loud enough for the news camera to catch every word. Helen Martinez, age 79, died of cancer. 2 weeks later, your mother filed HOA violations against her property for unmaintained landscaping while the family was planning her funeral. She pulled out another document. 3 weeks after that, Bradley here filed inheritance claims on behalf of a long-lost nephew, who turned out to be his paralegal using a fake identity. The family sold under pressure for $340,000. Bradley's development client bought it for $350,000 and flipped it 6 months later for $890,000. Rachel looked up at Bradley. Want to explain how your paralegal became an heir? Bradley's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Let's continue. Rachel pulled another file. June 2017. Robert and Mai Chen, elderly couple, limited English. Your mother filed violations for unapproved garden decorations, which were traditional Chinese lanterns their grandchildren had hung. She showed photos to the deputies. Fines totaling $8,000. Bradley filed a claim saying the property had unclear title due to their immigration status 20 years prior. They paid $15,000 in legal fees, proving they owned their own home. Their son Robert is now on your HOA board, Mrs. Drummond. Small world. Patricia's face went white. September 2018, Jennifer Walsh. Husband died in a car accident. 3 kids under 10. You filed violations 2 weeks after the funeral. Rachel's voice went cold. Broken fence board. Grass too high. Mailbox post needs paint. $2,500 in fines while she was explaining to her children why Daddy wasn't coming home. She turned to Bradley. Then you filed claims that the property had title issues, requiring legal review. She paid $9,000 to your firm before realizing you were creating problems that didn't exist. The deputies were no longer just listening. They were documenting, taking names, writing dates, asking Rachel for copies. November 2019. Rachel kept going, relentless. Military family, soldier deployed overseas, wife managing home alone with 2 kids. You filed violations for American flag display and military decorations, Mrs. Drummond. Patricia actually gasped. That's not... I would never... You did. Rachel slapped down the violation notice. Patricia's signature at the bottom. While her husband was in a combat zone, you threatened liens on their home. They paid $4,500 in fines under duress. She stacked the files. 14 of them. Combined financial losses, $287,000 in direct costs. Property value losses from forced sales, $1.2 million. Emotional trauma. Marriages strained, health affected, children uprooted. Rachel looked at the deputies. This isn't a property dispute, gentlemen. This is organized fraud. And it's been happening in your county for 6 years. One deputy reached for his radio. The other asked Rachel a question that made my chest tight with satisfaction. Ma'am, are you alleging criminal activity? Rachel smiled. I'm providing documentation of criminal activity. What you do with it is up to you. Patricia grabbed Bradley's arm, panic in her eyes. We need to leave, now. But Rachel wasn't done. Before you go, Mrs. Drummond, there's one more thing. She pulled a manila envelope from the file box. That's a preservation demand letter. You and your son are required to preserve all documents, communications, and financial records related to any property you've claimed inheritance rights to. She handed it to Patricia. Destruction of evidence is a federal crime. Patricia's hand shook as she took the envelope. What are you talking about? Rachel's smile was ice. Oh, we're just getting started. You see, When you filed those forged documents claiming inheritance rights to the Whitmore estate 3 days after Gerald's obituary ran, you made one critical mistake. She turned to the deputies. You used Boulder County letterhead and a clerk's signature stamp you weren't authorized to possess. That's not just fraud, Mrs. Drummond. Pause. Let it land. That's forgery of government documents. If you discovered your neighbor had been systematically defrauding grieving families for years, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. Patricia looked at Rachel like she'd lost her mind. Government documents. I'm an HOA president, not a criminal. That's when I decided it was time to introduce myself properly. I stepped forward for the first time since the legal team arrived. Patricia and Bradley were so focused on Rachel's accusations, they hadn't noticed the shift. The deputies had. The news reporter had. Even the neighbors watching from their windows had sensed something change. It was time to end the performance. Mrs. Drummond, let me properly introduce myself. I extended my hand. She didn't take it. Trevor Bancroft. I'm the CEO of Rocky Mountain Heritage Insurance, the company that's held the insurance policy on this land since Augustus Whitmore built this mansion in 1888. Her face went white. We've underwritten every single property transfer in Maple Ridge for 137 years, including yours. I let that sink in. Every deed, every title policy, every HOA filing that affects property rights in this neighborhood crosses my desk eventually. So when you filed forged inheritance documents 3 days after Gerald's death, I smiled. I already knew about it. Bradley's fingers flew across his phone screen, searching my name. His face went from pale to gray as the search results loaded. Patricia realized her HOA authority meant nothing against an actual property law expert with 137 years of documentation. Their fraud attempt had targeted someone with complete access to every property record in the neighborhood. Why didn't you tell us who you were immediately? One deputy asked. I looked at Patricia, her designer clothes suddenly looking like a costume. Because I needed to see how far she'd go. Filing a false claim is one thing. Filing it with forged government documents, bringing law enforcement under false pretenses, staging a media ambush, that's a pattern of behavior. I turned to Rachel, and patterns prove intent. Patricia's desperation showed in her voice. I was misinformed by Bradley. I believed the inheritance claim was legitimate. I'm the victim here. You're not the victim. Rachel's voice cut through the excuse. You're the architect. Your son provided the legal framework. But you provided the targeting system. She pulled out another document. Rocky Mountain Heritage Insurance doesn't just hold property policies, Mrs. Drummond. We also handle death benefit notifications for several life insurance carriers in Boulder County. Patricia's eyes went wide. Which means we receive notifications when policyholders pass away. And for the last 6 years, every single death notification in Maple Ridge has been followed within 2 weeks by an HOA violation notice from you. Rachel showed the timeline to the deputies. 14 deaths, 14 violation notices, 14 legal claims from Bradley. That's not coincidence. That's systematic targeting of vulnerable families. Bradley tried to salvage something, anything. This is harassment, conspiracy theories. My estate recovery practice is legitimate legal work. You can't prove. We can prove everything. Rachel's smile was ice. You see, Mr. Drummond, when you attempted to bribe County Clerk James Rodriguez 3 months ago to process fraudulent inheritance documents, he reported you to the FBI. Bradley's face went from gray to green. The wire transfer of $18,000 from your mother's LLC to his personal account? He never deposited it. He provided it as evidence. She pulled out bank records. And when federal investigators started looking at your financial history, they found something interesting. 2 other county clerks received similar payments over the past 3 years, $15,000 in 2019, $22,000 in 2020. Rachel spread the wire transfer records across the hood. That's not estate recovery, Mr. Drummond. That's bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. Patricia grabbed Bradley's arm, her voice shaking. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them... Mom, shut up. Bradley's lawyer training finally kicked in. Don't say another word. We're leaving. Now. But Rachel blocked their path with one more document. Actually, you're not. She handed papers to both deputies. The Boulder County District Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation this morning into real estate fraud targeting recently deceased homeowners' estates. They're very interested in speaking with Mrs. Drummond and her son. Patricia's legs buckled. Bradley caught her arm. His face showed he knew it was over. And the news camera captured every second. When someone tries to steal your property and you have the power to expose their entire criminal operation, would you do it immediately or let them dig themselves deeper first? Tell me your strategy. Rachel wasn't done. She pulled out a laptop and opened it on the SUV hood. I knew what was coming next. The evidence that would turn this from harassment into a federal case. Spreadsheets filled the screen. Transaction records, bank statements with highlighted entries, wire transfer confirmations with dates and amounts circled in red. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. This was organized crime hidden behind HOA bylaws and estate law technicalities. And every number on that screen represented a family targeted during grief. August 12, 2019. Rachel read from the screen, her voice clear enough for the news camera. Wire transfer of $15,000 from LM Consulting. That's an LLC registered to Patricia Drummond to the personal account of County Clerk James Morrison. She turned the laptop so the deputies could see. Memo line, consulting services. 3 days later, Clerk Morrison processed inheritance documents filed by Bradley Drummond claiming rights to the Walsh property. Rachel looked up at Patricia. Want to explain what consulting services a county clerk provided that were worth $15,000? Patricia's mouth opened. Closed. No words came. Let me save you the trouble. Rachel clicked to another screen. March 2020. Wire transfer of $22,000 from LM Consulting to County Clerk Rebecca Stevens. 5 days later, she processed documents for the Chen property case. She clicked again. June 2020. Wire transfer of $18,000 to Clerk Rodriguez. Except this time, he didn't process anything. He reported the bribe attempt to federal authorities. Rachel closed the laptop. Total documented bribery attempts, $55,000. And that's just what we've found so far. One deputy was already on his radio, calling for a detective unit. The other was photographing the wire transfer records with his phone. Bradley's lawyer brain was calculating. Federal charges, mandatory minimums, career destruction, prison time. The math wasn't good. This is insane, Patricia stammered. Those payments were for legitimate business consulting to county clerks. Rachel's eyebrow raised. What business advice were they providing? How to commit fraud more efficiently? She pulled out another document. Your LM Consulting LLC has no legitimate business activity. No clients, no services, no office. Just wire transfers to government employees and payments from HOA funds you authorized without board approval. Rachel handed the financial records to the deputies. $67,000 in HOA funds paid to LM Consulting over 3 years, for property management services that the board never voted to approve. Patricia paid herself with community money to harass homeowners. She stacked the evidence neatly. That's embezzlement on top of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Patricia's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face somehow went even paler. It's the HOA treasurer. Her hand shook as she answered. Hello. Silence as she listened. Then, what do you mean the board called an emergency meeting? You can't. I'm the president. You need my approval for. The person on the other end hung up. Patricia looked at Bradley with pure panic. The board is meeting without me, right now. They're voting on my removal. Rachel smiled. Actually, that meeting started 20 minutes ago. I may have sent the board members copies of certain financial documents this morning. She checked her watch. Funny how quickly people distance themselves from fraud when they realize they might be implicated. Bradley grabbed his mother's arm, his voice low, urgent. We're leaving. Don't say anything else. Not one word. But it was too late. A Boulder police detective unit pulled into the driveway. 2 unmarked sedans. Behind them, 2 more vehicles. Dark suits, FBI jackets. Patricia saw the federal agents and actually whimpered. Bradley closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. And I felt what I'd been working toward for 3 weeks. Not revenge, justice. When someone commits fraud, do you think the punishment should be based on the amount stolen or the number of victims hurt? Let me know your perspective. Real quick, if this justice moment just gave you chills, hit that share button. Everyone dealing with HOA nightmares needs to see this story. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the handcuffs come out. While Patricia stood in my driveway being investigated for fraud, 5 blocks away, her HOA board was discovering exactly how she'd been using their authority. And they were voting her out. The Maple Ridge HOA Community Center conference room held 6 board members around a table covered with the same financial documents Rachel had shown the deputies. Robert Chen, the board treasurer and retired accountant whose parents Patricia had targeted in 2017, had spent 3 hours that morning going through every transaction Patricia had authorized. His hands shook as he presented his findings. These people had trusted Patricia. They'd signed documents she prepared, and now they were realizing they'd been accessories to fraud. She told us these legal fees were for neighborhood property protection, Jennifer Walsh said. Her voice cracked. The same Jennifer whose husband had died in 2018. The same woman Patricia had targeted with violations while she was grieving. I voted to approve $23,000 in payments to her consulting company because she said we needed professional property management. She looked at the others. I had no idea she was paying herself to harass homeowners. I had no idea I was one of those homeowners. Robert Chen pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. According to these records, Patricia has issued 127 violation notices in 4 years. Not one of them was brought to the board for review as our bylaws require. He looked up, anger replacing shock. She's been operating as a dictator, not a president. Another board member, Michael Torres, the vice president, raised his hand, his voice tight with concern. Can we be held liable for what she did? We signed authorizations for those payments. That's why we need to act now. Robert's accountant training kicked in. We need to suspend her immediately, hire independent counsel, and cooperate fully with any investigation. Distance ourselves legally while doing the right thing ethically. He pulled out a motion he'd already drafted. I move to immediately suspend Patricia Drummond from all HOA authority pending investigation into financial irregularities and potential fraud. Second. Jennifer's voice was firm. All in favor? 6 hands raised. Unanimous. Robert pulled out his phone, started typing a text to Patricia. I'll notify her now. Then we contact our insurance carrier and report potential board liability. Then we hire an attorney separate from Patricia's interests. He hit send. The message was simple, direct, final. Emergency board vote complete. You are removed as HOA president, effective immediately. All financial accounts frozen. Independent audit commissioned. Board cooperating with DA investigation. Do not contact any board members or homeowners. Our attorney will be in touch. 5 blocks away, Patricia read that message. Her knees gave out. Bradley had to hold her up. What? He demanded. What does it say? She showed him the screen. Below Robert's message, another text came through. This one from the HOA's attorney. Mrs. Drummond, I represent the Maple Ridge HOA Board. I advise you to retain separate counsel immediately. The board considers you a potential adverse party in pending legal matters. Patricia looked up at me. Not with anger, not with confidence, with fear. The woman who'd arrived an hour ago with police escorts and media cameras demanding I vacate her family property, now stood trembling as her entire world collapsed. Her board had abandoned her. Her authority was gone. Federal agents were approaching, and she was about to learn what justice actually looks like. If you were on that HOA board and discovered your president had been committing fraud in your name, what would you do first? Protect yourself or fix the damage? Tell me in the comments. Detective Sarah Williams stepped out of the unmarked sedan with the calm authority of someone who'd handled hundreds of arrests. Behind her, 2 FBI agents in dark suits approached from a second vehicle. This wasn't a local property dispute anymore. This was a coordinated takedown of a multi-year fraud operation. Patricia saw the FBI jackets and actually whimpered. Bradley closed his eyes. Doing calculations, federal charges, mandatory minimums, career destruction, prison time. The math wasn't good. Patricia Drummond. Detective Williams' voice was clear, professional, loud enough for the news camera to capture every word. You're under arrest for fraud, forgery of government documents, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and theft by deception. She began reading Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Patricia wasn't silent. She screamed. This is insane. I'm a respected HOA president. You can't arrest me for trying to protect my son's inheritance. Detective Williams didn't pause. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Handcuffs clicked around Patricia's wrists. The sound was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in 3 weeks. Patricia looked at me, eyes wild, voice desperate. This is your fault. You ruined my life over a $500 fine that started this. I hope you're... Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent, the detective repeated. I suggest you use it. Bradley got the same speech 30 seconds later. He stayed silent, but his hands shook as the handcuffs clicked closed. The news camera captured everything. Patricia's breakdown, Bradley's silent perp walk, the federal agents escorting them to separate vehicles. This was going viral within hours. FBI Special Agent Thomas Bradley addressed the cameras. This investigation has been ongoing for 3 months. We thank Mr. Bancroft and Rocky Mountain Heritage Insurance for their cooperation in documenting this fraud scheme. He paused. Let that register. We believe there may be additional victims across multiple states. Anyone who believes they were targeted by this operation should contact our office immediately. The reporter turned to me. microphone extended. Mr. Bancroft, do you have a statement? I kept it simple. Justice for Gerald and 14 other families who were targeted during the most vulnerable moments of their lives. That's what today is about. The police cars pulled away. Patricia in one, Bradley in another. Neighbors had gathered, 20 people watching from yards and driveways. Some looked shocked. Others looked relieved. Several looked angry they'd been deceived for so long. As the crowd started to disperse, an elderly couple approached me cautiously. The man was silver-haired, late 70s. His wife held his arm for support. Mr. Bancroft? His voice was hesitant, hopeful. We're Frank and Dorothy Martinez. Recognition hit me. The first case in Rachel's files. We lost our home to Patricia and Bradley 4 years ago, Frank continued. We paid $8,000 in HOA fines and legal fees before we couldn't afford to fight anymore. We sold for $200,000 less than market value. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. We heard everything today. We saw the arrests. Is it true? Can we get our money back? I looked at Rachel. She nodded. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, I think you need to be part of a conversation we're having tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I gestured to the mansion behind me. Bring any documentation you have. Because what you lost, you're getting it back, along with 13 other families who Patricia and Bradley destroyed. Dorothy Martinez started crying. Frank put his arm around her, his voice thick with emotion. We thought no one would ever believe us. We thought they'd gotten away with it forever. They didn't, I said, and they never will again. When you see someone who abused power finally facing consequences, is it satisfying or just sad? Tell me how you feel about justice moments like this. The next morning, my dining room table was surrounded by 14 families Patricia and Bradley had destroyed, and we were about to make them whole again. Frank and Dorothy Martinez sat to my right, Jennifer Walsh and her 3 kids to my left, Robert Chen's elderly parents near the window, the military family whose flag violations had happened while their sons served overseas. 14 families. Every person in that room had been targeted during life's most vulnerable moments. Death of a spouse, job loss, medical crisis, military deployment. Patricia and Bradley had weaponized grief. We were about to weaponize the legal system. Rachel Chen stood at the head of the table. Documents organized, strategy prepared. Her voice was confident. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I know many of you have waited years for this conversation. Dorothy Martinez wiped tears before Rachel even began. Patricia Drummond and Bradley Drummond were arrested yesterday on multiple state and federal charges. But criminal justice is only part of the equation. You deserve restitution. She placed a binder in front of each family. Here's our plan to get you every dollar they stole. The room went silent. 14 families leaning forward, listening to hope for the first time in years. Phase 1, asset seizure. Rachel clicked open her laptop. Patricia's home has equity of $340,000. Bradley's property and assets total $180,000. Their combined bank accounts, now frozen, hold $127,000. Patricia's luxury vehicles are worth $85,000. She showed the spreadsheet. Total immediately available, $732,000. Frank Martinez's hand shook as he looked at the numbers. Phase 2, HOA reimbursement. The board voted last night to refund all improper fines issued by Patricia without board approval. That's $67,000 across all families. The HOA's insurance policy may cover additional board liability. Robert Chen nodded. We're committed to making this right, Every penny Patricia stole in our name gets returned. Phase 3. Civil lawsuit. Rachel's voice hardened. We're filing against Patricia and Bradley personally. Claims include fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil conspiracy. We're seeking $1.5 million in compensatory damages and $3 million in punitive damages. Jennifer Walsh raised her hand, her voice tentative. How long will this take? HOA refunds within 60 days, Rachel answered. Set liquidation within 6 months. Civil judgment within 18 months. Full restitution, 3 to 5 years with enforcement. But here's what matters. You'll get paid, every dollar, with interest. She pulled out another document. Phase 4. Criminal restitution. The prosecution is including mandatory restitution as part of Patricia and Bradley's sentencing. The judge can order repayment as a condition of their sentence. If they don't pay, they don't get parole. Dorothy Martinez spoke, her voice breaking. We lost $180,000 when we sold our home under pressure. Will we really get that back? Rachel met her eyes. Mrs. Martinez, you're getting it back, all of it, even if we have to garnish their wages for the next 20 years. The room erupted, not in cheers, in tears. Relief, validation, justice. Robert Chen stood. There's one more thing the board wants to propose. He looked at me. Mr. Bancroft, Gerald Whitmore wanted this mansion to become something meaningful for the community. What if the HOA helped fund its restoration as the Gerald Whitmore Community Resource Center? He pulled out architectural plans, a place where homeowners can get free legal advice about property rights, where no one else gets victimized like we were. The room went silent. Then Dorothy Martinez started clapping. Within seconds, everyone joined. Gerald's dying wish, save the mansion from being forgotten, was about to become something bigger than either of us imagined. If you were one of these families, would you want the money back, or would seeing them go to prison be enough? What matters more? Financial or emotional justice? 6 months after Patricia's arrest, the neighborhood she terrorized for 4 years was healing and making sure her crimes could never happen again. Fall 2020 brought change to Maple Ridge. The Whitmore estate transformation took shape through summer and into autumn. Victorian turrets received new copper roofing that gleamed in Colorado's sun. Stained glass windows, carefully restored by artisans who'd researched Augustus Whitmore's original designs, caught afternoon light and painted the hardwood floors in colors Gerald would have remembered from childhood. But the real change wasn't architectural. It was the steady stream of neighbors who stopped by to help, to donate, to witness history being saved. Patricia had weaponized the HOA to isolate and control. We were using Gerald's mansion to rebuild connection and trust. The HOA board, now led by Robert Chen as president, implemented sweeping reforms. New bylaws passed unanimously in August. All violation notices required board vote before being issued. No individual authority. 30-day warning period before any fines assessed. Appeals process with neutral third-party review. Annual financial audits by independent CPA. Term limits. 2 years maximum for president position. The changes were radical, necessary, long overdue. Quarterly community meetings with transparent agendas replaced Patricia's closed-door decisions. Public access to all financial records. Criminal background checks for board candidates. The neighborhood was rebuilding itself from the inside out. Property values rose 12% in 6 months. Not because of improvements, because of reputation. People wanted to live somewhere that had proven communities could heal, that bad people couldn't win forever. that standing up for what's right actually mattered. Young families specifically chose Maple Ridge because of what had happened here. In November, Patricia and Bradley's plea deals came through. No trial. They couldn't risk jury conviction on federal charges. Patricia pleaded guilty to 6 state felonies and 3 federal counts. Sentencing recommendation, 7 to 9 years prison. Mandatory restitution, $287,000 to victims. Forfeiture of all assets. Lifetime ban from HOA board service. Bradley pleaded guilty to 8 state felonies and 5 federal counts. Sentencing recommendation, 12 to 15 years prison. Permanent disbarment from practicing law. Restitution, $450,000. His legal career was over. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for December. Meanwhile, construction on the Gerald Whitmore Community Resource Center was finishing ahead of schedule. Local contractors donated labor. Neighbors volunteered. Historical preservation grants covered materials. The sign went up in late November. Gerald Whitmore Community Resource Center, where neighbors protect neighbors. That's what home was supposed to be. Robert Chen called me the day before the sentencing hearing. Trevor, we've processed the first round of refunds. Every family who paid improper fines is getting their money back. $67,000 total. Checks are in the mail. His voice was emotional. My parents got their refund yesterday. They cried. Not because of the money. Because someone finally said they were right and Patricia was wrong. He paused. Thank you for not staying quiet. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to just move away and let her win. I thought about Gerald, about his 2 a.m. phone call, his dying wish. I made a promise, I said, to a friend who lost everything to COVID except his family's home. I had no idea that promise would end up saving 14 other families too. That's legacy, Robert said quietly. The next day, we'd all find out what justice actually costs. If you could create one law to protect homeowners from HOA abuse, what would it be? Share your ideas. Lawmakers need to hear from real people affected by these issues. The federal courthouse was standing room only. 14 families came to watch Patricia and Bradley learn what justice actually looks like. Judge Margaret Harrison presided from the bench with the weight of 30 years on the federal judiciary. She'd seen fraud cases before, hundreds of them. But this one was different. The gallery behind me held 14 families whose lives had been upended not by strangers, but by neighbors who'd weaponized homeowner association rules to prey on grief and vulnerability. Patricia and Bradley sat at separate defense tables. Their attorneys flanked them like shields that wouldn't be enough. Judge Harrison reviewed the pre-sentence investigation in silence. 5 minutes. 10. The courtroom waited. Finally, she looked up. Before I impose sentence, I'll hear victim impact statements. Who wishes to speak? Dorothy Martinez stood first, 71 years old, hands shaking, voice strong. Your Honor, I'm Dorothy Martinez. My husband Frank and I worked for 40 years to own our home. When Patricia Drummond targeted us 4 years ago, we were at our most vulnerable. She looked at Patricia. Frank had just survived a heart attack. We were drowning in medical bills. She issued violation notices for things that weren't even against HOA rules. Her son filed false legal claims against our property. Her voice cracked, but didn't break. We spent our retirement savings fighting them. We lost. Today we rent a small apartment and will never own a home again. She turned back to the judge. But worse than the money? She taught us that people are cruel, that neighbors become predators, that home isn't safe. I hope these sentences teach others that such cruelty has consequences. Dorothy sat down. Frank squeezed her hand. Jennifer Walsh stood next. The widow Patricia had targeted 2 weeks after her husband's funeral. My husband died in March 2018. 2 weeks after his funeral, while I was still explaining to my 3 children why Daddy wasn't coming home, Patricia sent me a violation notice. Her voice hardened. Then another. Then Bradley claimed there were title issues with my deed, and I needed to pay his firm to resolve them. She looked at Bradley. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I was a widow with 3 kids under 10, and they tried to steal my home. Not for money, for sport. Because they could, because no one stopped them before. Jennifer's voice rose. Today, someone finally did. 3 more victims spoke, each story more devastating than the last. Then Judge Harrison spoke. Mrs. Drummond, Mr. Drummond, you didn't commit crimes of passion or desperation. You built a business model on exploiting grief. Her voice was ice. You targeted families at their most vulnerable moments and systematically destroyed their financial security, their homes, and their trust in community. She leaned forward. You violated your positions of authority, Mrs. Drummond as HOA president, Mr. Drummond as an attorney, to prey on those who trusted institutions to protect them. Patricia was crying. Silent tears. Bradley stared at the table. The law demands accountability. These families deserve justice. Judge Harrison opened the sentencing document. Patricia Drummond, 7 years federal prison, 3 years supervised release, $287,000 restitution to victims, $50,000 fine, forfeiture of all assets, lifetime ban from HOA board service. Patricia gasped. Her attorney held her arm. Bradley Drummond, 12 years federal prison, 5 years supervised release, $450,000 restitution, $100,000 fine, permanent disbarment. Bradley's head dropped to his hands. You are both remanded to custody immediately. Deputies approached, handcuffs ready. Patricia tried to speak. Your Honor, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was trying to save it, Mrs. Drummond. Judge Harrison's voice cut through the excuse. You still don't accept responsibility. 7 years will give you time to think about that. The handcuffs clicked. Patricia and Bradley were led away. The gallery was silent. Then Dorothy Martinez started crying. Relief, not celebration. Frank held her close. Jennifer Walsh hugged her kids. Robert Chen's parents held hands, tears streaming. This was justice, not revenge, justice. As we left the courthouse, Dorothy touched my arm. Mr. Bancroft, thank you. For Gerald, for us. For not staying quiet when it would have been easier. I shook my head. Gerald made me promise to save his family's home. I had no idea that promise would end up saving 14 other families too. She smiled through tears. Maybe that's what home really means. Not just 4 walls and a roof, but people who stand up for each other when it matters most. Is 7 to 12 years in prison enough for destroying 14 families' lives? What would you consider appropriate justice? Tell me in the comments. 1 year after buying a mansion for $3, I stood at its grand opening. And Gerald's dying wish had become something bigger than either of us imagined. Spring 2021 brought rebirth to the Whitmore estate. 200 people filled the grounds. Neighbors, former victims, state legislators, media. Children running through halls that had sat empty for decades. The spring sun caught the restored copper turrets exactly as it had 133 years ago when Augustus Whitmore first stood on this ground. Gerald would have loved this moment. The sign above the entrance read, Gerald Whitmore Community Resource Center, where neighbors protect neighbors. Robert Chen stood at the podium for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. 1 year ago, our community was fractured by betrayal. Today, we're united by purpose. His voice carried across the crowd. This center represents what HOAs should be. Neighbors helping neighbors, not authoritarians controlling them. The new bylaws we've implemented, the transparency we've committed to, the accountability we've embraced. These aren't burdens. He paused. Emotional. They're protections. Gerald Whitmore's mansion stood for 132 years. May the community it now serves stand forever. Colorado State Representative Amanda Foster spoke next. The Whitmore Act, which I'm proud to sponsor, will reform HOA oversight across Colorado. It establishes mandatory financial audits, creates a state ombudsman for homeowner complaints, and implements criminal penalties for HOA board members who abuse their authority. She looked at the families gathered. This legislation exists because one man, Trevor Bancroft, refused to be a victim, and 14 families found the courage to demand justice. That's how change happens. Applause filled the yard. They asked me to speak last. I stood at the podium, looked at the mansion Gerald had sold me for $3. Gerald called me at 2 a.m. from his deathbed and asked me to save his family's home. I thought that meant restoration, new roof, fixed windows, fresh paint. I paused, finding words for what I'd learned. I didn't understand what he really meant until Patricia Drummond showed up with police trying to steal it. The crowd was silent, listening. Home isn't just property. It's security, dignity, the fundamental belief that what you've built is yours, and no one can take it without cause. I looked at Dorothy and Frank Martinez, at Jennifer Walsh and her kids, at all 14 families. Gerald's $3 sale saved more than a mansion. It saved that belief for 14 families who'd had it stolen. My voice caught. That's legacy. The ribbon was cut. The center opened. People toured the restored rooms. The museum honoring the Whitmore family. The legal clinic offering free consultations. The memorial wall for Gerald and his family. COVID-19 had taken everything from Gerald, but his final act had given everything to us. As the ceremony ended, a young couple approached me. First-time homebuyers. Just moved to Maple Ridge. We specifically chose this neighborhood because of what happened here, the woman said. Her husband nodded. Because you prove that communities can heal, that bad people can't win forever, that standing up for what's right actually matters. The woman continued, we want to raise our kids somewhere that believes in justice. I looked at the mansion behind them, Gerald's legacy, Augustus's history, 14 families' justice, $3 well spent. If you could turn personal tragedy into community transformation, what cause would you champion? Share your vision in the comments. So let me ask you one final time. What would you do if your HOA president showed up with cops trying to steal your legally purchased property? Would you comply out of fear? Or would you stand up, even when everyone told you to just pay the fine and move on? Here's what 14 families and I learned through this fight. Power without accountability always becomes abuse. HOA boards, corporate managers, government officials, anyone with authority over others will eventually exploit it if there's no oversight. Patricia Drummond wasn't an anomaly. She was predictable. What made her dangerous was that no one challenged her until it was almost too late. But here's what she didn't know. What made her downfall inevitable. Documentation beats intimidation every single time. Security cameras saved this case. Every illegal trespass, every threat, every forged document captured and preserved. When Patricia claimed I was lying, I had video. When Bradley claimed his actions were legitimate legal practice, I had records of 14 other families. Evidence turns accusations into convictions. You're not alone. I thought I was Patricia's first target. I was her 15th. When I found the other families, we had power. Alone, we were vulnerable victims. Together, we were a pattern proving systematic fraud. If you're being targeted by an HOA, a neighbor, anyone abusing authority, find others. You're never the only one. Authority isn't legitimacy. Patricia had an HOA president badge and an arrogant attitude. Bradley had a law degree and expensive suits. Neither had actual authority to do what they did. Don't be intimidated by titles or aggressive confidence. Know your rights. Verify claims. Challenge illegal demands. Justice takes time, but it's worth it. This fight lasted 18 months from confrontation to sentencing. Legal fees, stress, time away from family. It cost me. But 14 families got their money back. 2 predators went to prison for 7 and 12 years. An entire state reformed its HOA laws. Some battles choose you. When they do, fight. Maybe you're watching this because you're in your own fight right now. Maybe your HOA is threatening illegal fines. Maybe a neighbor is abusing their authority. Maybe you're wondering if standing up is worth it. Here's what I know. Silence enables abuse. Compliance rewards predators. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be a victim. Gerald Whitmore sold me a 137-year-old mansion for $3 because he wanted it saved from being forgotten. That $3 transaction exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud operation, sent 2 criminals to federal prison, returned nearly $300,000 to victims, reformed HOA law for 3 million Colorado homeowners. Sometimes the smallest acts of trust create the biggest waves of change. Your property rights matter, your home matters, your peace matters. And sometimes, refusing to stay silent when everyone expects you to is how you turn injustice into transformation. If this story motivated you, hit that subscribe button right now. I share stories about everyday people fighting back against entitled tyrants who think rules don't apply to them. Drop a comment telling me, have you dealt with HOA abuse? What happened? I read every comment, and your story might help someone else facing similar battles. Share this video with anyone fighting their own HOA nightmare, property dispute, or neighborhood bully. They need to know they're not alone, and that justice is possible. And if you're facing something like this right now, document everything. Find allies, know your rights, and never let anyone make you believe that protecting your home, your property, and your dignity isn't worth fighting for. This is Ephraim with HOA vs. Karen Stories, and this was how a $3 mansion purchase became a fight that changed lives. Until next time, know your rights, stand your ground, and never let bullies win.